Among the things that chimpanzees are not presumed to be able to do are to produce language in the sense that we think of it, spoken language. And you take a basic sentence, the strangers talk to the players. And as we know reflexively from our early education, we know that phrases can be broken down so that we have basically a noun phrase and a verb phrase. The strangers, the noun phrase. The verb phrase, talk to the players. Then in this sentence, there are 6 words. The strangers talk to the players. And then morphemes. A morpheme is not the most bandied word. Word endings, prefixes, tense markers, and the like are critical parts of each sentence. Some of the morphemes, the smallest meaningful units of language, are words. And you also need to identify these and determine the role each word plays in a sentence. So that's the idea of a morpheme, is basically the smallest unit of language that kind of makes sense on its own. So the can't be subdivided, but stranger can be. You've got the idea of strange, which is unfamiliar, and then which generally signifies a person occupying a position or taking an action. Player or foreigner. Foreigner occupies a position of sorts as somebody new to the country, or player as somebody that's actively playing, etc. So that can be broken down into interpretable parts. The S part indicates a plural. So those are morphemes. They're individual units of language that are separately meaningful, and strangers has 3 separate parts to that. Talked has 2 parts. Talk, the verb, the ed indicates past tense. Those are separable. And then in English, we have phonemes. And we have, how many in the English language? I can't remember. It's 40 odd. I think 44. Oh, excuse me. It's 40. The English language has about 40 phonetic segments that are sometimes called phones. Now, interestingly, this has probably been about 30 years, maybe even longer, going back to 1990. We considered that those that struggled with reading were not very good at breaking down words into their phonemic parts. And what are those phonemic parts? Let me go a little bit further here in the text. Thanks for waiting. We'll get to this in a second here. Phonology, in which we have language broken down into its most irreducible parts. So you can see the P for pat and apple, the B for bat and amble, the D for dip and loved, etc. But then it gets a little bit more complicated down toward the bottom. Boy, doily. When the O and a Y are combined, it makes its own phoneme. Then you have a soft SH, shoe, mush, deduction. And then somewhere in here is a hard CH, like over on the left there, porches and beaches, etc. So then you've got the J sound, bit and injury, etc. So we've derived 40 of these. And I'll tell you just a little bit of a preview for another time, I suppose. In other languages, they have phonemes that we can barely imagine. I believe it's Korean that has 3 distinct K sounds. So we think of pork and fork and kite. However, they have subdivisions even within that we could barely detect even if it were spoken in front of us. So our phonemes are maybe slightly different than other languages, and we may actually have more than other languages, etc. So that's that idea of one aspect of a structure of language. And this product, Hooked on Phonics, rehearsed those phonics over and over again with struggling readers that were middle school age, I suppose you could say. Grammar is not in reference to good grammar, as we talked about. It's this idea of intelligible phrases or utterances, recognizable as examples of language that a native of the speaker of language might produce. They can not only recognize it, but I can say new things. I can say that I may have bought Bitcoin, or I can come up with a completely new phrasing. Grammar will allow me to generate an interpretable idea for another person. And then there's your author draws a distinction here: linguistic competence versus linguistic performance. Chances are even people that know very good grammar may fail to produce it in some cases. They may use double negatives and other butchering of the language, but generally they recognize what the correct version is. So Chomsky, who's still alive, by the way, if you had to argue the greatest linguist that's ever lived, at least in the United States, in terms of developing many of these theories, it probably would be Noam Chomsky, who is 95, 96 now. But he separated these ideas of linguistic competence, in other words, knowing language generally and having a firm underpinning, versus the consistent performance that we might render. And they may separate at times, especially under pressure. People, when they get excited or under stress, they may produce poor grammar or poor language structure, I should say.